Hey all, it's Fair System here. This is going to be a very pretty basic rundown on TBMC based on our current understanding of it. Um, yeah, do be aware this I'm not going to go into any detail, but there is going to be discussion on deliberate repeated abuse and trauma in this video, so you might want to click away if that's going to be a problem for you. Um, anyway, let's start us off. When we say TBMC, what do we mean as an acronym initially, right? So, as an acronym, stands for Trauma Based Mind Control, which should give you some idea. But in principal terms, what does that mean? Well, to start with, that means deliberately pushing someone through or a person or a group of body into a specific set of trauma responses to achieve a significant level of control over them through the use then of deliberately triggering those trauma responses at a later date. Yeah, more comprehensively and on the more significant, well, that's not quite the right word, but on the more major scale, it's um, you take a body through a set of repeated traumas, very specific natures, give you specific trauma responses, and then put those trauma responses together to form a level of control over a body and the people within it. Um, yeah, it's more common. It's more common for this to happen to plural bodies because it's significantly easier to hide what's going on both from the body and from people around it. But not that's not always the case, right? It's not always how things happen. It's just more common that way. And yeah, also because it starts the quote unquote ideal is to start it very early on in life because easier to hide once again and achieve a higher level of control. So yeah, um, so very early on, there's initial startup tends to be things like loyalty and to the abusers and um, secrecy tend to be where things start. You um, one way of doing this is with the formation of headmates like Brain, who, as you may or may not know, is got a high level of control over our system and continues to maintain a high level of secrecy over our trauma, and because of this, right, it's not the only way to do that, right, and occasionally multiple headmates will be used to achieve this, and not it's not always that you're going to have a relatively more openly vocal headmate like Brain taking on that role. Depends an awful lot on the perceived need for on how perceived the need for more direct control is. Right, if the perceived need is for very limited direct control over the safer parts of life, where the abuse is mostly kept on the emotional side and is, not necessarily seen obviously abuse without knowledge of what constitutes emotional abuse and what someone is going through beyond very basics. So yeah, um, but then of course, obviously for us, Brain has always been relatively in front and relatively directly controlling, which implies the perceived need for more direct control. Which, given we're able to talk about this now, they probably made the correct assessment there in some ways, but there we are. Anyway, once loyalty and secrecy are as ensured as they can be, there's generally a move towards adding in or changing around headmates to exist to achieve other functions within for the group, and this can be, you know, quite messy, of course. But yeah, other roles the group want achieved, other roles the abusers want to achieve, have access to. Yeah, both within the body and for the and externally, there are roles that are perceived as needed, and sometimes those interlink into a single headmate, but not always the case. Okay. Some things are best achieved both internally and externally by an individual. Sometimes you're better off splitting that, in their opinion. Don't agree with them. Well, no. Um, the roles are quite wide and varied in nature, but tend to sort of stick to the same basic categories of, is this role one that is for internal control? Is this one where we want someone to victimize externally, just for the sake of victimization? Or is this, or do we want someone to further perpetrate what, does the group want someone to further perpetrate what the group's already doing? That's the other major option often, and that's not a pretty thing to think about, that one, because yes, like, all of those are bad situations to be placed in, right? There's no denying that. It's just that often that one is the hardest to unpack, because not necessarily the hardest to unpack, but it comes with a certain level of added complexity from the fact that there was a potentially a feeling of control mixed in, right? It often was. As part of how you do it is you put someone in a situation where either they do X thing, which gives them feelings of control and power, or Y thing, where they're powerless and they and the body they're in are getting hurt, right? And it's incredibly difficult for anyone in that sort of situation not to take the option that hurts someone external, because that's safe for them, and you can't. It's hard to judge anyone that's done that too harshly, because they were doing what they had to survive, but it still comes wrapped up with an awful lot of guilt for those who were in there and doing that, because, well, that's the natural response to being put in a position where you had to hurt others. Yeah, and it's so hard to unpack that mixture of powerlessness and complete and utter control, which comes from being in that position. Anyway, we're gonna have to go now because this is getting difficult for us to talk on. So, we'll catch you all next week, I suppose.